Thank you. Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to ACDC. This is call number 171. It is issue 1825 in the PM repo. There's the agenda in the chat. And yeah, I think it'll be, well, there's a lot on the agenda here. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So first up, Fusaka. So as we all know, we had mainnet just recently and went pretty well. There's at least one issue with Prism. I think they're working on a postmortem for that. Um, yeah, and then this week we had BPO1, which again seemed to have gone pretty well. Would anyone like to add anything for either of those two events? I know for the postmortem, I think Prism might still be working on it.
Yeah, so BPO1 looked very good. That was happening earlier this week. We did a quick blob spamming test as well just yesterday. We were able to do 15 blob transactions in 28 consecutive slots, and the network didn't seem to mind it at all. So that's good.
Okay, great.
For Prism, I guess we've recently released two new releases. One release that's just a hotfix so that you don't need the flag anymore. And then we had another release with semi-supernode feature and backfill feature. There's still a couple other things we're still investigating, but just wanted to call that out.
Okay, great. And that was like 701 for the patch, and then was there 710?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. POTUS?
Yeah, we've noticed something that perhaps is affecting other clients as well. We had some users reporting like a bad degradation on attestation performance, and it boiled down to disk. We aren't calling attesting on a block until we saved all of the column sidecars, and it turns out that some nodes that had moved database to slower disks are now were performing perfectly fine before Fulu are now performing badly because of this. So it might be a general thing. We are looking into how to optimize this, but yeah, so we're urging our users to move to NV to faster disks just because of this.
And you think it's because of the blobs or something else?
Well, I think it's just this thing of like attesting while we are storing. Just replying to Raul, it's a dangerous, it's a trade-off. If you fail storing, then you need to go back and do something about it, because otherwise you'll be on an async situation where your database is telling you that that block was available, but then you don't really have the columns that you need to attest for. So I think it's this kind of situations where you don't want to be async.
Yeah, remind me, did we have in a do we signal the head slot, the latest slot that we have custody for in the metadata message or the status message? Because if we do, then you could just not update that until it's written to disk. So you wouldn't be expressing that you have custody yet.
Well, the problem is what happens if you get the child, and then you'd be syncing a block for which you've said that the parent was available, and now you don't have the columns to even serve them.
Okay, I suggest we take this offline. There's a thread, I think, already in Discord, so we can continue there and we can dig deeper. I do think there's some trade-off that we can, like optimal trade-off that we can hit here.
Yeah, we are going to optimize this anyways, but just to flag this, that this is affecting users that don't have fast disks, and it wasn't before.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for raising that. Enrico?
Yeah, just comment on that. So I think like when you are testing that you've seen things. So the sampling was okay. So I think it's theoretically okay to attest while you are storing, and then it's just a problem of guarantee that you can serve that. So if you are also serving via RPC things that are in flight is okay. Then the problem is just having the database consistent when you start up the node and making sure that you are filling eventually gaps that you are creating while stopping the node and you haven't finished writing stuff on disk. That's a thing that we are dealing with.
But even attesting is an issue, right? Because you have a separation of the validator client and the beacon node. So by attesting, the validator client calls the beacon node. It says, "What's your head?" So to attest to that thing, the beacon node itself must have updated the block and said, "This is my head." But then to do that, the beacon node itself must have declared the block available. And I think being async here, saving your head, declaring locally on your beacon node this block is available, but not having the column raises a danger.
I'm not fully agree, but I think we can discuss.
Yeah, I think his point is that you do have the columns, they just might not be persisted, right?
I mean, it's attesting the availability. So if you've seen, it means that the data was available.
Yeah, but the beacon node doesn't know it's seen something. So at least we consider things seen like a block. Have I seen this block? Yes. If I have it in DB, I have seen it. I don't act on anything that I have not stored. Otherwise, I might end up in a situation in which my DB and my view of the chain is inconsistent, and this leads to bad bugs.
But again, custody to me is different by sampling. So that's the main point why I'm saying that it's okay.
Yeah, I think that perhaps the difficulty here is that the status message does not separate between the custody head and the chain head. So there's just a head slot. So then when you are externalizing that you have a particular slot that you consider head, any client would be entitled to ask you for the custody columns for that head, which in this case you might not be able to serve if you haven't stored them in disk and the client is not able to serve them from the buffer, which I think might be the solution here. Just like save them in the buffer. But anyway, we can take it offline because I think we're getting into implementation details now. But yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I will say I agree, fine, take it offline. These are not implementation details. And I think that there's a lot of temptation to take these shortcuts that are not, I mean, how do I say this without opening, cans of worms here, but which are dubiously valid, let's say, debatably valid. It is not that easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might disagree on what's a shortcut and what's not. But yeah, Roel, you mentioned there is a thread somewhere in Discord, so yeah, let's just move this somewhere else. Okay. Anything else on Fusaka? Otherwise, there's one more thing on the agenda. But otherwise, yeah, the mainnet BPO1 looks like they went well. This issue that we had just now. Anything else?
Just
Okay.
one thing.
Sure.
We have several things that we will improve in our coming release. Some bugs here and there. So some of the clients using Teku is giving us some feedback, and we are improving several things. So hopefully we will have something by this week on initial starting next week.
Okay, great. And this is around like new things in Fusaka with columns or custody or something like that.
Stuff related to Fusaka, custody, and syncing and so on.
Okay, great. Thank you for the update. Okay, then the last thing here on the agenda for Fusaka is a bit of a bridge item, which is a retrospective process. let me grab the link really quickly. Should be this one. So yeah, we did this starting with Pectra, and the context there was Pectra was like a pretty rocky fork. So we had the idea to do essentially a retrospective on, yeah, kind of the fork and the upgrade process generally. Now that Fusaka is generally out the door, it makes sense to go ahead and do this again. So Nixon made this ETH Magicians post here, and the idea is for the next few weeks just to have this open. Yeah, if anyone would like to provide feedback, this is a great place to do so. And yeah, this helps just refine how we do everything. Yeah, so take a look. And essentially, the idea would be this phase of the process would go until we start ACD in the new year, which is, yeah, something like 3 weeks from now. So take a look, reflect and add your feedback there when you have a minute. Okay. Anything else on Fusaka? Otherwise, we'll move forward into the future. Okay. So let's go to Amsterdam. And we had a few things here. So one, there was this conversation about trustless payments in ePBS. We should talk about that. Otherwise, the intent was to finish scoping for Amsterdam. We had a few open questions on some of the EIPs that we'll get to in this section. So to kick us off with trustless payments, let me just kind of replay, at least my understanding of the frame here. So, we had this part of the EIP, and it was selected in full as a headliner, a long time ago at this point. We've had this conversation a couple times in ACDC of trustless payments and, how the feature works and, should it be taken out? Should it be split? Different options here. Should we leave it as is? A few weeks ago, there was definitely some, input from the community here, in particular, some of the existing builders and relays and different people in the MEV ecosystem who, this would definitely impact. They had some concerns around the design here. So they brought this to, I think it was 2 or 3 ACDCs ago. In the meantime, we had a breakout where, I think we continued the conversation. And yeah, the point of all this, or at least, yeah, again, given the narrative how we got to today, we should make a call on what to do with this. So yeah, I'm happy to open the floor for comments. I can sort of play back my summary of where I think things are at, unless someone would like to add their takes. Okay, so from what I've seen, what we had said again a few different calls ago, we basically would, have trustless payments as is, unless there was some security issue. And yeah, again, I think this is, yeah, there are many different opinions here on what we should do. From what I've seen, there have not been any arguments to the point that trustless payments are like actually negative or bad for the protocol. There are some arguments that might suggest they're not being used or like wouldn't be used. But then we have to take into account the fact of what we gain. And what we gain is essentially this fallback for, what might be tail scenarios. But again, keeping in mind Ethereum's values and like what we're trying to do here in aggregate, we can definitely make the argument that this is important and that we should do it now. So I think that's essentially where we're at. We keep it as is. In terms of what might start to be a compromise, I think there's been some work around finding ways to allow the status quo of the MEV ecosystem to exist in this world. So at least that's something I would want to ask today, and or something I would, want to keep working with the authors of the EIP on, is finding a way to make sure this is supported with like minimal disruption. Again, I think in particular having relays be staked it's an ask. I don't think it's a huge ask, and I think that's kind of the main difference. Otherwise, today's players can kind of live in the status quo. So that's where I'm at. Again, I don't know if there are any other comments or perspectives we should raise.
Maybe like just very shortly wanted to speak some appreciation for everybody for engaging in the discussion. And maybe one very small meta point, just that I've noticed, because I've spoken to a lot of people now about this, and I've noticed that regardless of what people's positions or opinions were, they were sometimes pretty worn out by the discussion. I think sometimes when you work on a really hard problem, that makes a lot of sense, right? Stuff is just hard, best support each other and continue. But I feel like when the resistance is more like people against each other, then maybe in general for the EIP process or future changes, I could imagine, this is very much my personal opinion, that slowing down might be very healthy to work through some of these things. But again, I'll immediately say that I feel like a lot of people have really done their best to try and do precisely that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you definitely have been helping coordinate, this investigation that we've just had, which again, I mean that in like a very positive light. We are going to get the best design by having the most people look at this and poke, from every possible angle and corner. So, yeah, thank you for that. And okay, so again, I think then where we're at, we keep the EIP as is. There's, I think, some questions around, from here, details around how these different components should fit together. And again, I think we should make sure that there's a way, again, that, the current ecosystem will not be completely disrupted. My understanding is that this is already the case. But yeah, let's just make sure that we can kind of keep that in mind as we move forward with the design. So, any final comments on this? I would say for the record, like, yeah, this is, I think, at least the second time we've kind of formally considered this. And again, the takeaway is we're keeping them in. I do feel at this point we've done the work to hear as many people out as we can. And yeah, again, the only, consideration or the only point at which we want to revisit this is if there were like very, very clear security issues, which again, no one seems to be able to find. So any closing comments on that before we go to the next topic? Okay. I don't know, there's some comments in the chat, but I think people should speak up if they want. Yeah, Oscar.
Yeah, not at all to disagree with the decision. I think that's actually the right decision. But just maybe as a general comment, I do think for many reasons, some of them definitely, I think, also triggered by some kind of behavior from the EF research side. But I do think looking back at the history of the EIP and the governance process around it and whatnot, I feel like it relatively early on turned unnecessarily adversarial. And I think it turned very much into a my proposal, your proposal kind of situation. I think there were several kind of like small adjustment ideas that then ended up never being really considered, given that it was like, oh, this is yet another attempt to basically subvert like one side winning or something. I don't know. I felt maybe this is purely my perspective. This could be, and then and my apologies for bringing this up. I just do feel like once we have a retrospective, maybe for the ePBS inclusion process, I do think we could have done more as a group. Again, not even, I think, in chat I actually worded it a bit as criticism of the champions. That was probably immature. I think more as a group as a whole, including from our side. I think we could have done more to keep it focused on the technical questions. And I think there could have been more collaboration on, yes, let's move forward with ePBS, but also early on into the process, let's take some more time actually working on potential iterations. And so I do think there was something that didn't went well. I understand why the community now reacted the way they did. But by now, I think we have a good headliner. Maybe not perfect, but yeah, just one to mention.
Thank you. There's a good question here from Francesco I think we should address. So yeah, again, I think in part to try to find like a nice middle ground between, again, kind of the status quo and what this EIP would introduce. There are some proposals to modify parts of trustless payments. And I do think we should sort out, yeah, how we're going to resolve those. I think my sort of straw man would be what Justin's saying here in the chat, like something like mid of January. We should say like pencils up on spec changes. POTUS here, you said these are big changes. I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Oh, they aren't so big in principle, but I guess the biggest concern here is that for historical reasons, perhaps, this goes back to like 2 years ago and discussions with Mike Neuter actually and the builders at that time mentioned that yes, they would, if they are going to be staked, they would rather not be losing capital and then be earning rewards. But it turns out that now when they are faced with the churn and deposit churn, they said that they seem to be aligned that they would rather forfeit the rewards, not be validators, keep the stake without getting rewards, and just take that as the payment for bits. The problem of doing this, like removing the builders from the validator slides, is that it also removes the ability for validators to submit bids. I'm not sure if this is a trade-off that we're willing to make, because this was the feature that allowed us to remove the self-building property. We were hoping that this set of validators would still be decentralized enough that we can just remove the self-building requirement. Anyways, there's a bunch of discussion to do about this. I believe that we can actually implement these changes. I think this is an honest request from builders to avoid the churn.
Right. And so to be clear, this is taking away the validator duties of the 0x3 validators?
Right. So it would be taking away the validator duties. And in this way, we can allow them to deposit faster. They still will need to go over a long churn to withdraw. Otherwise, this is a DOS. But it will allow them to deposit and get included quickly, because it wouldn't even affect the week subjectivity period or anything. So it's easier. It makes the protocol easier to reason about. There's many reasons why you would want to have something like this. You could also, in principle, include builders that are only staked for 1 ETH or minimally, and then they would be able to bid for this match. But I think for me, the biggest loss of such a system would be the fact that we lose this very nice feature, which is validators are able to submit bids.
Okay. So I think in terms of moving forward, I think getting clarity here ASAP is what we should do. Yeah, I assume there are still ePBS breakouts. Like, I think this is something we should be covering on the breakouts until we get to some resolution. Yeah, like I think it's a little premature to be like, okay, by January 15th, like pencils up. But if anything, that's like a target I think we should keep in mind and sort this out as soon as possible. One way to de-risk this moving forward is just, yeah, I mean, again, we have history here, but if we can get to a place where we do the more permissive thing first, to add, essentially more restrictive things later, we should do that. Oh, let me rephrase that. What I mean is, like, if we can do something such that it's like more more forward compatible later, we should do that. In the event that, say, we want to ship and like do these iterations down the line. Okay. Yeah, Francesco's saying here in chat that he's worried we might not be able to sort this out. Yeah. I think it's worth at least, yeah, taking another breakout call to really investigate this in earnest. It sounds like we have an idea. Like, is it really just this one idea of having non-validating stake builders? Okay. I mean, it sounds like it, but it sounds like the situation to me. So, um, let's keep moving forward on that. This should be the topic of the next breakout. And yeah, let's try to assess there how this looks like in terms of, yeah, any additional changes and what that might mean for timing and things. Okay. Any other comments on trustless payments for the moment? Okay. So that's that. And okay, next up would be doing the non-headliner EIP scoping. So, okay. We have a number of EIPs to touch on to round out the Glamsterdam scope. One of them is the question of FOCIL that we had. There were questions then around 7688, 8061, and 8080. And I think those were the last ones on the CL side that we needed to get through. So let's go ahead and touch on FOCIL. So yeah, again, this is also, I think there's been some history here with this EIP. What we had said, the process for this was that, there were concerns around scoping in Amsterdam, and because of that, we wanted to think about putting it into a feature fork, say Heka. As part of that, it'd be nice to have some credible way to commit to Heka, or commit to FOCIL and Heka. And I feel like we tried this on the last call. I think there was already confusion around, should we do CFI, should we do SFI, and how that should work. So that all being said, as of the last ACDC, the points were made, hey, we essentially shouldn't get just like, different client team members' opinions just in time. We should also reach out to the execution layer. So we took this to ACDE last week. And I think, again, people are generally supportive of including this in some fashion. And I think that essentially brings us to today. So, I think following that arc, I'm willing to have a conversation if people want to try to think about scheduling FOCIL in some form or fashion in Heka. But I will also say at the same time, having thought about this some more, I think what will happen is that it will be tricky to say, hey, we should ignore the process. Process being just opening up the headliners for Heka and moving forward that way. So, if people want to essentially, raise points for one way or the other, we should do that now. I do think right now my recommendation is just to say, hey, we tried this. It's going to be hard to get consensus. I think, especially given the fact that if we do want to deviate from the process, it should be, I think, fairly uniform that this is what we want to do. I think already some people have called out that we should not ignore the process that we have laid out with headliner selection, et cetera. So that would mean going to the headliner process for Heka with this question of FOCIL. One quick side note, and then I'll stop talking. Given that we just finished up Fusaka, this is essentially now is the time to think about headliners for Heka, which I'm going to touch on this after we finish this EIP scoping for Amsterdam. But yeah, point being, we would start the headliner selection process for Heka essentially, start of next year, so in just a few weeks. Okay. Yeah. So I spoke.
Yeah, thanks. That was I think that was a good recap. I mean, my opinion is that it would be quite healthy to stop like moving the goalpost and we keep asking clients what they think, and they keep basically saying that they are in favor of included, but then we keep moving anyways. And I also just want to add that we are again like in a situation in which most of the pushback on FOCIL is about process. It was already the case for Amsterdam, and now we are basically repeating the exact same pattern for H star. I actually think it maybe echoes. Well, I don't want to take his word, but like what Ansgar was saying was like decisions being made on technical merits or of an EIP of a feature rather than just like focusing on the process. And yeah, I feel like at some point, like if people have like strong technical reasons to be concerned about FOCIL, or they actually don't support it, like they should voice it, but it's not been the case for a while. And I do think there is like a sort of limit to allowing a sort of like veto power if the pushback from people that don't want to see FOCIL in is just about process. Yeah, the last point is, I think I said that on ACD a bit, but continuously having client teams sort of like have to come up with opinions about an EIP. That means they need to have the actual discussions. They need to come together, come back with an opinion over and over again. And I think like it's quite wasteful in terms of time if we actually don't end up considering these opinions. So I just want maybe people to be mindful of, draining this process longer, which is why I would favor like actually coming to a decision around FOCIL inclusion, just because it's been very long. And yeah, I will stop talking now.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, Dano, and then maybe I can respond to Tomo.
Yeah, so I've been asked to express my opinion on the topic. So I spent a lot of time like talking with L2s because that's what I do at L2Beat. And FOCIL came out a few times as a way to reduce the challenge period, which is something that a lot of protocols want. But even apart from this, the two things I want to say is one of the reasons I think the conversation of FOCIL has been frustrating a little bit. Both people, pro FOCIL or against FOCIL, is because I don't think we're like discussing it the proper way. And I think the proper way to discuss FOCIL is to think about timely inclusion, right? So first of all, we need to agree that timely inclusion is valuable. And what I want to convince you is that it is. Like there is a huge class of protocols that requires timely inclusion for safety. One obvious example is optimistic rollups with a challenge period. Another example is the intent protocols that also have a challenge period for settlement. Another example is stuff like Polymarket. They use a 2 hours challenge period to settle disputes. Or in general, upgrade delays, exit windows, you want to exit, withdraw from protocol. You need time and inclusion for safety, right? So it's not just about row censorship resistance, it's also about safety of funds. And the proper way to model time and inclusion is through economic attacks. I've seen very, very few attempts to discuss FOCIL in the lens of what is the advantage that it gives to an user if there are an economic attack, right? So I pay a tip to close a transaction, someone else pays another tip to push out my transactions. There is only one paper by Offchain Labs trying to discuss this benefit of FOCIL. The outcome of this paper and the result is it seems like it gives you 1 order of magnitude improvement in the sense of if you have an attacker that has $100 billion and wants to censor you, without FOCIL, you need 10 times more money to try to include these transactions than with FOCIL. I don't think the model is perfect. I think the model needs to be improved. It doesn't correctly model FOCIL, in my opinion, but I think this should be how the conversation will need to go forward. And that's also why I think it's valuable to have a little more time to discuss the benefits of FOCIL.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, again, just sharing my perspective, given that I talked to many of the people on this call. I don't think anyone's really debating, at least at first order, like the technical merits of FOCIL. I think it, in terms of how we got to today, it's really just a question of like when to scope it and what process gets us there. And yeah, so again, it was considered for Amsterdam. I think there are legitimate concerns around scope and complexity to not do that. Then the question was, can we put it into the next work, especially given, and I think what's pretty uniform support for it. And then circling back to, so I spoke, yeah, like I agree the process has not been ideal. It's been pretty rocky. And, I think my answer to that today is just to say, hey, let's take a step back, lean back on the process, because that's something we can all agree to. That's just like sort of a, established precedent that we have. And then that would be my suggestion is say, okay, given especially that we're starting Heka headlining just in a few weeks, this is the time to do that. Carl.
Yeah, I think my thing here is that it's like FOCIL does bring many amazing benefits that I think most people here would like to see. The reason I think it's important that we still go through the process is just that we need to consider shipping FOCIL means we don't ship other things. We need to consider what are those other things and whether we want to make those trade-offs in H-star. And I don't think those discussions have been had. So for that reason, I think it's very important we go through the headliner process. I think it's very likely that we end up back at FOCIL, and great then, but I think it's important to do that.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, not just for us, but also to give the community an opportunity to weigh in. Yeah. There's some side chat. I don't know if anyone would like to speak up to add an input to the conversation.
I think CFIing it is pretty uncontroversial at this stage as like as a positive signal. SFI is controversial and I think that for that reason we should go for CFI, because if we make it SFI, there's not really any meaning in the difference between CFI and SFI. SFIing something as a head as the first thing that goes in essentially denotes it as the headliner. And so I understand the desire to move it to SFI as soon as possible to make it the front runner, but it really should go through the process, and this SFIing it to begin with makes this meaningless.
Oscar.
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with Nick. So I personally also preferred to just have it CFI'd, just given that I think Thomas had a point that we keep always asking, like on all codefs, there's always the conversation, okay, what do the codefs think? And then the codefs seem to have preferred in the past SFI. So I just wanted to say, if we go ahead with SFI, I personally would prefer the version of that where we just say it is SFI'd already, but we just go through the normal headliner process as usual. And in that headliner process, we will just consider, okay, we already have SFI'd FOCIL. Does that mean we want to have it as the headliner? We could still decide to not have it as the headliner. I mean, as of one call ago, we were still considering including it into Amsterdam as a non-headliner. So there's definitely precedent for it to potentially be a non-headliner. So we could just decide that as part of the headliner process. I don't think it would be too much of a bending of the process. And I would, if there's strong demand to do SFI already today, I personally would prefer that over locking it in as a headliner, because that really, in a way, I think is a bit of a violation of the headliner process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the catch there is like this should be considered a headliner. Like, FOCIL is big, putting it into the protocol will produce headlines, which is like, the intuition behind the name headliner. I think it was, so I spoke and then Carl.
Yeah, just wanted to say I think the SFI is more important than the headliner for FOCIL, because again, I think if we follow through the whole history was about like trying to get a credible commitment for FOCIL, whether it's a headliner or not. And yeah, I mean, my worry right now is that, as a headliner, I already said that, but like FOCIL is very ill-suited just because it is cross-layer and it is quite a big EIP, but like it's not huge and it's very ready. So it sits in between this sort of like EL and CL and like huge feature versus very small, which makes it a bit weird to fit in the headliner process. So I mean I would be completely fine SFIing it as a non-headliner rather than CFIing it as a headliner, which I think is more weird for the process.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, like headliner is different than CFI or SFI. Like headliner is an intrinsic thing around the importance and impact of an EIP. And then, yeah, like the CFI SFI thing is kind of separate to that, where it's like, okay, we would have a headliner. Implicit to that is that it's something that will be scheduled. And then we move forward to the usual process where, okay, you know, we CFI something to say, again, it's being considered for inclusion. As soon as we are ready to put it onto DevNets and R&D process, it becomes SFI. And, you know, I think sort of the only shortcut there with the headliners is that they sort of de facto and or immediately go from the CFI to SFI step. Carl.
Maybe this is just a misconception on my part, but my understanding of headliner is also a lot to do with the size of this, and I do feel like FOCIL's pretty big. I feel like it's wrong to be deciding on whether you're SFIing this or not, based like without it being a headliner, because from my perspective, this is a rather large change. Maybe it's not as large as some of the other things we've had as headliners, but still pretty impactful. I think that's one thing. The second thing is like if we are going like wanting to go down this route, in the past we've first decided the headliners and later on decided what else goes in the fork based on how much capacity we have left after deciding the headliners. Because they're the most important things. So I think SFIing us before we do that. And then finally, I think the credible commitment thing here is like something that's been run with a little bit too hard. And I think a little bit of we tried to abuse the process to try and make this feature not happen in Amsterdam due to complexity, when I think that was a backwards way of doing this. I think this would have been too complicated to put in Amsterdam, especially if you want to keep shipping things on shorter timelines. And so we should have just bitten the bullet then and been like, this can't be in Amsterdam based on that. We don't need to make these credible commitments. And I think like that was, I don't know if that was the initial intention of these things around credible commitments, but I feel like this spiraled very quickly out of control. And then people like feel let down because they feel like we need to give them these things around FOCIL. I just think there's like the path of how we got here has been a little bit unfortunate and has like resulted in a lot of this fatigue and keep having to ask the devs what they want or whatever. And I think, as we mentioned, it's clear the devs do want something like FOCIL, but I think it still needs to be considered within the greater picture and to the same.
Vitalik.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being in the call a couple of weeks ago, right? And it certainly felt to me like we justified FOCIL not being in Amsterdam under the arguments that like basically everyone wants it, and it's of course it's going to happen in H-star, and the people saying that it'll just keep on getting pushed back more and more are being unrealistic. And like from that perspective, like, you know, we definitely do have a history of pushing things back more and more, and I think in this situation there's a lot of value in like actually showing that we are able to hold to commitments if we decide to do them. And I think I mean more generally, right? Like the process needs some kind of defense against and like things continually getting pushed back more and more until they until they eventually don't happen, and just like basically actually getting it out there and giving people confidence that it will get out there seems like something that a lot of people have been counting on. Like, I don't think we can isolate it from all of the other discussions. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. I think my take here is that it's definitely a headliner. Like, I think, FOSIL is big and it does have a lot of impact. We should be proud of that and like give it the recognition it deserves that it is a headliner. If it is a headliner, we have this fairly new process around that, which would make it a bit tricky to move ahead with some, definitely SFI today. Again, because we are going to start the headliner process for Heka in, just a few weeks' time. So I think given that we don't want to not respect this new process that we are trying to install to make ACD more smooth around scoping and EIP selection, we should just respect that and move forward with this again in a few weeks' time. I think it was Jihoon, then Carl, then Mike Client.
I wanted to talk about FOSIL, but is the decision already made?
Oh, sorry. No, you can share.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that from my understanding, the main reason behind pulling FOSIL from Amsterdam was fork scope, which affects some fork cadence. And I do agree that we will also want to respect the process, but in terms of better pipelining perspective, SFI, I think SFI and FOSIL will help us a lot to achieve faster fork cadence, as we can have developers' attention, either it be core devs or EPF fellows. So regarding FOSIL readiness, we had 4 CLs and 1 EL interrupt a while ago. Nethermind was close to make the interrupt, but has been busy with other stuff. And then EPF fellows came up in a bottom-up fashion, and they've built RES and Aragon EL prototypes. So as soon as we can have core devs attention by SFI it, for example, I expect we can have 8 clients interrupt very soon, which is more than enough for kicking off the first DevNet. And yes, this is based on Fusaka, but we already know how to rebase FOSIL onto GLOAS. And core devs have estimated development time for the rebase will be roughly a month once we have working ePBS implementation.
Okay. Yeah. If anything, I think my takeaway from that is that, yeah, there's a lot of work that's gone into this. And so it should be a very straightforward, or let me say, it's a very strong case to be made for it as a headliner. And if we wanted to find some solution that still signals like, hey, this is very important and top of queue for core development generally, I think Nick's suggestion of CFI today makes a lot of sense. But yeah, Carl and Matt, and then we should probably move on to other things.
Yeah, I want to push back against Vitalik a little bit, saying that we have a history of delaying things in order to making sure that results in not being shipped. I don't think that's the case here. I don't think anyone talking about this process here is trying to delay FOSIL for the sake of not getting included. I think it's at least that's my perception. I know there's some people who really don't like FOSIL that much, but I don't think there are that many. I think it's more just about questioning whether it's the right thing to do right now. And I think the same has been true for many of the other things we've delayed. It hasn't been about not wanting them at all. It's just been about, hey, we only have limited resources that we can spend on this, and is it the right thing to be doing right now? Is it the most impactful thing?
Right. Well, hold on. There's 2 separate arguments, right? One, which is that following the the process is good, and the other is the idea that this is lower priority than 6-second slots. And I think the second one is like one that a lot of people are really against. I mean, I don't know, like I feel really against it because basically, it feels like the sort of thing where like we really would be just continuing to push back everything related to censorship resistance more and more. And like that, like, and so I think like it is important to separate those two arguments now, right? Because like I personally talk to a lot of people who are afraid that Ethereum is going into a kind of basically a mode that deprioritizes everything other than acceleration, and it's like really important to clearly show that that's not what we're doing, and that like basically that FOCIL is being either delayed or done in a particular time for good technical reasons.
I mean, I agree with what you said. I'm personally one of the people who thinks 6-second slots would be more impactful, but you still really want to see FOCIL on chain at some point. I think from the people I've spoken to, I've seen a lot of the opposite opinion. I think a lot of people hear FOCIL and think it's just a censorship resistance thing, and then don't understand that there's some nuances there. Like FOCIL doesn't include censorship resistance for blobs, or FOCIL has this 8 kilobyte limit, so it's not really useful for people that use a lot of data, so it's not useful for the stock people. Things like that, I think, are a little underappreciated and underdiscussed. But yeah, I mean, I do hear your points. The second I wanted to touch on quickly is just about what we're talking about here in terms of timelines. Is like the proposal's just to be discussing this again in January, where we're going to have the headliner process. It's not like there's this major delay in terms of when we are discussing it, and I don't really see opinions shifting that much between now and then, so I don't think there's like this huge risk being taken by FOCIL to be following the process. Anyway, I think my opinions are known on this now.
Okay, like client, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I feel like we're trying to do some process engineering here. Like it doesn't really feel like the right place to talk about alternative proposals to FOCIL, or we're not really talking about technical aspects of FOCIL. We're just trying to close the fork scoping for Glamsterdam. And then we have this weird aspect of making a commitment for the future. And it doesn't seem like an open process when we're like committing to the next thing when we've already communicated what the process should be. And so people who might not agree with what the next thing is supposed to be are not coming onto this call and like making alternative proposals. So I think, like Carl said, we're not saying we're never going to do this. We're just saying let's follow the process starting when the process starts as soon as possible, which is going to be January. That's a month away. If it is the most supported thing for the headliner process, then we're just going to put it into H-star regardless. So I think that CFI is the right thing to do there.
Caspar, last comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the process in my mind as of last ACDC was to ask clients whether to SFI or not on this call. And I think clients can take into consideration whether they think it's too much of a deviation from the process to SFI now and decline it on the basis of that. But I think we've asked clients to form an opinion, and we can just ask them.
The point of the process, though, is to communicate publicly about how we make decisions and do operations. And if the clients can always just, pick what they want to do immediately and not, have an open communication and process about it, then, what was the point of even saying this is how we're going to do things?
No, but it's been open and communicated.
It's been open for Glamsterdam.
For 5 months.
It's been open for Glamsterdam. It's not been open for H-star.
I mean, we've literally asked clients again, right? Like, what do you guys think? And
it's not just for clients. It's for the entire community. It's an open process for everyone involved. It's not just like clients who are deep in this thing, who are coming to all the calls to come and say, I want to do this next. Like,
what I'm saying
that's
is
the
that
point of.
last time you said maybe we are afraid it's just like individual decisions and basically emoji based inclusion of things. So and I think the decision was to say, okay, let's actually ask client teams once again, because that's fair. Like we actually need to ask them their opinions maybe one more time. And now we are doing that. And we don't care apparently because we are asking them, but we don't take into account that those opinions. So why are we asking them if we just move on anyways?
I don't know. I wasn't the one who proposed we asked them. I think, and I've said from the beginning that we should just do the headliner process ASAP and pick FOCIL or whatever as the headliner. Not these like credible commitments that like circumvent the process.
But then we are like in a very tough situation, right? Because like either we go back on what we say, and then like we can't really trust what we say because the point of like saying things and trying to get to credible commitments and everything is like to stick to it, or we go against this process that now seems to be overruling every other aspects, including like what importance a feature brings to the table, which is just like both situations are like there. We need to just choose one basically. And I think that is up to clients probably and people in this call to decide. And I think there is no concern about like the community being completely taken aback by the fact that FOCIL will be included in the next fall. Like they've been asked for 5 months what they thought. They've participated again and again. They keep being very supportive. So I don't think there will be like
They asked what they want for
like, oh, shit.
Amsterdam. We didn't start the process for H-star yet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to jump in here. So, I think the intent was we would try to find a way to commit in Heka. I think it should be clear that we are not able to find a way. It is contentious. I think in light of that, we fall back on the process. So in terms of moving forward, that is what I had proposed. Yeah, essentially we just do DFI for Amsterdam today. We pick this back up with the headliner process in January for Heka. And again, I think reading the room, it should be very clear that this is a leading candidate for Heka as a headliner.
What do you think about Ansgar's position to SFI without the headliner decision?
Yeah, so again, I think we should be honest about it being a headliner. And because of that, it would be sidestepping the headliner process to do this, which, I think earlier I was more optimistic that this was, something we could do. I think even as soon as we had the idea, it became contentious in and of itself. So yeah, like I think, this is the first time we're doing this headliner process, but lesson learned. We shouldn't be trying to, be optimistic in this way in terms of like pipelining things or trying to move forward before the process has time to play out. And then, yeah, I think that brings us to where we are. I think, again, we just pick this back up in January and move forward with Amsterdam today.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. Then let's do that. And again, apologies for any additional thrash or anything.
Wait,
Yeah.
sorry. Is this decision to not make a decision?
The decisions to DFI for Amsterdam, and then we would go back to the process for headliner selection and for Heka.
Go back to the decision to make it a CFI or SFI today?
We can have that discussion. I think we also need to move on. I think your proposal to CFI is interesting. It does capture the community support, and core dev support today. The proposal was to not do that. Are you saying you would like to push for CFI?
I would push for a decision. At this point, I don't even care if it's CFI or SFI. Let's just make a decision today.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is that we should just follow the process that we have. We reach DFI for Amsterdam, and then we'll open the headliner process in January. FOCIL will be there.
Wait, so it's not even CFI'd?
We can CFI.
CFI it. Also, a bunch of people have their hands up.
Yeah, I think like Clan and Casper were from previous clicks. POTUS.
Yeah, so I support what Nix is saying. I think kind of CFIing it is uncontroversial. I agree with you that it seems that we couldn't come to consensus into making a credible commitment for next fork. But I think there was overwhelming consensus that CFI status was granted. And also that would give the communities at least some signal that we agreed to have this discussion. We just couldn't come to consensus on how to signal for the next fork, but we have some form of consensus. It's not that we're completely broken and we cannot agree on anything. And I think CFI was overwhelmingly approved.
Yeah, okay. Then let's CFI for Heka. I can make the change to the Meta EIP after this call. Then we'll pick this back up in January. So to play this all back, DFI in Amsterdam, CFI in Heka. We'll start the headliner selection process in January for Heka. Can we move forward with this? Okay, I'm seeing many thumbs up. Please. Well, I don't know. What I don't want to have happen is this happened a few calls ago where we made a different decision on FOCIL and there were a lot of thumbs up and then we basically walked that back. So let me just play it back one more time so we're on the same page. And I know this is taking a lot of time on the call. It's important. DFI for, okay, FOCIL, DFI for Amsterdam. Okay. CFI for Heka. We will start the headliner process in January, where again, all of the support should show up, and I think it will be a very strong contender for the headliner for Heka. I think we should move on. We're getting agreement. Again, I know this has been rocky and contentious, and I apologize for that. I think we're in a good path from here. Okay, thank you, everyone. Well, let's move on. Okay, we do only have, it looks like 25 minutes left. So let's try to get through the other EIPs. I believe the only thing we had to touch on were these three. So 7688, which are the stable container EIPs. And we essentially had a question of what to do with 8080 versus 8061. I suppose we'll just go in order here. So with 7688, we had said we wanted to take some time to do a little more due diligence on the complexity here. This would reach into SSD libraries, would also check some consensus types in Amsterdam, which, yeah, I think kind of has some pretty big implications. Yeah, I would be very curious to hear from client teams if they have updated thoughts on inclusion of 7688 for Amsterdam. Okay, yeah, Itan, would you like to say something?
I mean, I documented all this presentation.
Can't really hear you.
Yeah, your audio is pretty bad, Itan.
It's better.
No, it's not better.
So,
Yeah, maybe I can try to help here. So there's this PDF. And if I open it up, okay, so I think this looks like calling out which of the types would change. Yeah, it's still, I don't know, it's like very droppy. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what to make of this either.
It's an explanation of why this EIP, I mean, that PDF at least looks like an explanation of why the EIP is useful in that it prevents those changes in the generalized indices.
All right. So I think we understand the benefits of the feature, though. It's more like, I think the question is like, okay, how much, like, what's the actual lift to get this implemented and all the SSD libraries? I think they'll need to be tested. And then the question's also from there, if they need to be audited. And yeah, let me rephrase that. They will definitely have to be tested. And the question is like, what does that imply? Do they need to be audited? There'll be fuzzing efforts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it might end up being a bit more of an ask. Also, I think getting to a place where we're touching consensus types on top of changing the same consensus types with ePBS in Amsterdam is a little tricky. So it's, a decision I think we should make lately. And yeah, I mean, I have my own opinion, but yeah, I'd love to hear from client teams. Totus?
I just want to mention one thing about the CIP, which is, and I feel that this is getting sidetracked every time, but the price that we pay by not including this every fork should count as complexity that we should have saved on the previous forks. By having the CIP before, we should have saved complexity on previous forks. And we are always gauging this EIP against the complexity that it takes to implement for the next fork, forgetting how much we could have saved by having it earlier.
Yeah, Barnabas is asking if Prism's pro-inclusion.
I don't think we have a common understanding on the CIP. I don't think we have a common agreement on the team on the CIP.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we understand the benefits. The concern is just, scope and complexity that ends up becoming more than we think it is. Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think it'd be good to hear from, say, Pandops or maybe the testing teams if they have a, sense of the lift here. Okay, just going over the chat here. So there is generally support from the client teams, which is a good signal. Yeah, Solius has a suggestion that basically, we attempt this, which, yeah, I don't know if this is the best way to do this, just given other attempts at process things. But essentially, we would CFI, and then when there's room, once it's clear what's possible, then we could think about a SFI decision.
Yeah, just a small note. So I think the current process with fast hard forks every 6 months or so, it's kind of, we shifted to like a one big feature plus one headliner big feature plus some really small things. And the problem I see is in this process is that it becomes really hard to fit mid-size features which are not very small and also not a headliner feature. So I think and this 7688 kind of falls into this category. And my suggestion, of course, it's not the best in terms of the process, but as soon as we know the actual situation with the headliner feature, in this time it's going to be ePBS, which it's still for myself it's still not clear how long it will take all the clients to implement and test and so on. I mean, if we see that everything is going well, then why not to include this 7688 in Amsterdam? But otherwise, if we see that we underestimated the complexity of ePBS, then well, the only option is to keep the scope smaller. So that's my view.
Yeah. I mean, so the question I'd have then is how easy would it be to take out? Because I think what will happen is we'll get to a world where there's like, partial implementation, like people will start moving down this branch. And, so this definitely happened with the attestation, EIP and Pectra, where it ended up being more of a lift than we thought, but also it kind of got to the point where it was not worth it to take it out. I do think with the CIP, the changes are pretty self-contained. So yeah, like it seems like we could just do this work on a branch. And then if it gets to that point, we could just discard the branch. Does that align with client team's view of how they could go about doing this? Barnabas?
So I was following in the chat, and in the chat, basically every single CL team said that they are in favor of including this. So I do not see a reason to further discuss it. Let's just CFI it now, and then let's move on to the next EIP, because we only have like 15 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. That seems fair. So yeah, let's CFI 7688 for Amsterdam. And yeah, I think just again, for the record, let's keep in mind these concerns around complexity, and we should go about developing this in a way that it is possible to take out if we get to a point where we feel like that's the best choice. But people do seem to say this is, a pretty self-contained change and it's worth reaching for now. So let's do that. Okay. So we will CFI 7688. Okay, then we have the next two EIPs here, 8061 and 8080. And so I think at one point there was just 8061 here. We pulled out a subset into 8080. If Francesco's here, I would have a question because I think at this point they're actually just two separate EIPs, and I'd like to confirm that. But then ultimately, the question is we need to decide what we'd like to do. The last time we touched on this, 8080 essentially would handle this edge case that we had with withdrawals and consolidated validators. There was, pretty broad support for it. The question then was, do we also want to do 8061, which adjust the term limits? And the main thing here is this just provides better staking UX, especially if you're trying to exit the set. And I will say on this point, a number of parties have reached out from the community. So there's a comment here on the agenda from Fidelity, essentially saying that, this is something they're in favor of. I also had someone from Bitwise reach out who was also in support of this. So I just wanted to, again, add this quote to the record in terms of their support, as community approval for these, at least for 8061. So from here, I think we should make the decisions here. I believe I would say CFI 8080 is pretty non-controversial. Then the question is, do we want to do 8061? So maybe to play that back, I would propose we CFI 8080. Any disagreements? Okay. I would also propose that we CFI 8061. And the main thing here is that it will shorten the weak subjectivity period, which is the main question. So I'm curious what client teams think about this. I don't think they are Barnabas. I mean, we talked about this in the last CL call and everyone was in support.
I do have a question regarding 8061 about the person from Fidelity, their write-up, and talked about a 7-day target for the weak subjectivity period. Where does a 7-day target come from? Like, what as a because they framed this as, I mean, on one level, I think the correct approach, which is say, what is the target, and then as a word target that, as opposed to just sort of saying we want to speed things up, and with the weak subjectivity period ends up where it ends up. So I think the more principled approach. But where does the 7 days come from? Is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just adjusting the turn parameters and seeing the result. And, for the turn parameters in the IP, you end up with something like a week. But yeah, Francesco, you had your hand up. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I had my hand up for something else, but yeah, let me I can just reply to this. Like I said in the chat, the 7 days is just a number. It doesn't come from anything, but just like the previous number that was like 16 days or 15 days or something, like doesn't really come from anywhere, or like originally didn't come from anywhere. But yeah, I guess what I wanted to say originally was like, again, this is just something that comes from the parameters that are currently in the IP. We can just pick whatever we want. Of course, if we just pick the current number, then the IP is kind of pointless. It doesn't do anything. But it could be 12 days, it could be 10 days. It's just like there's a trade-off. Of course, it's not worth doing the IP if we say, oh, let's just reduce the weak subjectivity period from 15 days to 14 days. That's not gonna do basically anything. But again, it doesn't need to be 7 days.
Yeah. And then just to be clear here, I mentioned Fidelity and Bitwise, like they were not involved with this EIP. They just wanted to signal support for it. Just so that's clear. Okay. Yeah, I'm not hearing anyone say no to this. Actually, okay, no. There was a comment from Lighthouse. Yeah, Kingy, I don't know if you'd like to say more.
Just that the adjustments are, it's always non-trivial when we touch the consensus code, and we haven't seen the specific advantages that people would like to achieve. So I think that we could go down the CFI path if that's what everyone else wants to do. Just that it may not be as easy as it looks, and it's something that we could easily get wrong.
In terms of implementation, because I feel like this is something we have pretty good test support for in terms of the spec test and things.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Look, if that's the direction everyone wants to go, that's fine.
Okay. It seems like rough consensus is leaning towards CFI of 8061, but yeah, anyone feel like that doesn't represent their views? The proposal here is basically to, yeah, we can like further tweak the parameters to get to like the period we want. But in terms of making a decision today, we would go ahead and CFI unless, yeah, the conversation goes elsewhere. Greg?
Yeah, so I'm a bit confused. Like, I have the feeling that for all these EIPs discussed after FOCIL, there was no progress at all since the last ACDC. So basically, we had CFI'd all those EIPs, and we were waiting for kind of progress in the understanding of them from like all stakeholders. And I get the feeling that for most of them, like the input we had now is very small. So I was curious, like, should we expect a really final SFI or DFI decision? Because I was assuming that that was today.
Yeah, so the thing that we needed today is CFI things or DFI. If we DFI them, then we don't think about them for Amsterdam and we move forward. With the CFI decisions, it's again kind of what it says. It's considered for inclusion. The framing should be like, yes, the intent is to put this into the fork. From there, just in terms of process and actually like making this manageable to deploy, what we prefer to do is target the SFI set on a given DevNet, let's say, and again, to make this manageable, you kind of go one by one. So what that would look like is, again, we're right now focused on ePBS. For DevNets, once that is good and stable, then we basically can move EIPs from CFI to SFI. So there's just a process there to get to it. I would also push back some. I think, yeah, we have made progress. Again, yeah, I don't think Eton could really speak, but he did make this, diagram to call out the changes. I think people have had time to think a bit more about the implications there. So yeah, we made progress there. And otherwise, yeah, now we're just kind of discussing these last two. And we had already, I think, had pretty good agreement on CFI for one. And then the question was just 8061 now with weak subjectivity. And on that note, what I'm hearing is, yeah, other than perhaps Lighthouse with some concerns, but they're open if everyone else would like to move forward, we would go ahead and CFI 8061 along with 8080. And then, of course, obviously, the exact parameters can be tuned as we go through the R&D process. So that would be the proposal to CFI 7688, CFI 8061, and CFI 8080. And that's what we do today. Does this sound good from the client teams? Okay. No one seems to have an issue, so let's do that. And okay, we just have a few minutes left. So to round things out, let's move to Heka and Bogota. And I think the main thing I wanted to call out today was just a proposal here in terms of how to move forward with scoping there. So again, this is following the process that we've established for Amsterdam post Petra. And yeah, the immediate next step is this retrospective period following the one for Petra. We now have one for Fusaka, which again, we covered that earlier in the call. Then from here, the proposal would be to essentially copy the process from Amsterdam, where again, we have some time for fork focus and headliner proposals, then move into headliner discussion, finalization. Then we do non-headliners, and from there move to mainnet. So this ETH additions post here is proposing a way to move forward there. And in terms of the next critical thing here for Heka, it would have this headliner proposal process starting January 8th. I believe this is the first ACD that we'd have in the new year. That would go for about a month. Then we would move to headliner selection over the next month and move forward from there. So that's the proposal. I don't know if people have any January 5th. Okay. Then yeah, I might need to adjust the date, but that's basically the intent, is that we start the headliner discussion just with ACD in the new year. So yeah, again, I think this is what we should do. I do think people generally feel like the headliner process, is productive in terms of bringing the community more involved and gave them a way to engage more productively. So I would propose we follow a similar process. And yeah, in terms of timing, it's pretty straightforward, just about a month per segment. And then we move forward with Heka and Bogota. Any comments or questions on that? Leah?
Yes, I wanted to mention that I want to change. I mentioned this in the Discord. I wanted to mention that I want to change the name of the star. We have been looking at this, and Heka is the first time that this is not really a star that is located in the International Astronomical Catalog of Stars. We look for it, and it's kind of mentioned somewhere in a little corner in a Wikipedia page. But yeah, and we if we don't have proper methodology, we are running the risk that maybe in the future we're going to have 4 names that are fake or that means something weird. So I would like to have a second vote for the name of the star, and following to that, the portmanteau as well.
Okay, so you'd want to, at least the question is if we can change the name of Heka.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of personally would say the ship has sailed. I don't know if other people feel like we should change the name.
I think there are some votes on the chat.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. I think in terms of moving forward, we should take this discussion back to the naming thread that I think you linked here. Yeah, I think what I would say is if we really want to do this, then we should have an actual suggestion for next ACD and make the call there. So do you think we can do that? Like, essentially, yeah. Because it's not part of this official list, sure, we can go ahead and change it if people would like to. But I think also we should go ahead and have a name soon. So
Yeah,
there
exactly.
should be a proposal for next ACD next week, and then we can change it there.
Sounds good. How about I start a second vote and I try to mobilize all the core devs to get a vote, and maybe by next week we already have a vote, and then at the moment we can decide if we change to the new, most voted name.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess if you can show support for a new name and you want to bring it to ACD next week, then yeah, I think we have a conversation there. Yeah, does that sound good to you?
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. And then I think the last thing, because we are pretty much at time, that I was going to touch on the portmanteau. I will say right now, Hekota, however you'd like to pronounce it, is leading candidate. I think we need a portmanteau also ASAP. So, yeah. I suppose then let's see if we can get a proposal to change Heka next week. And if so, I'll also try to have a portmanteau to propose also as something we want to lock in. And we would go ahead and finalize that at the latest by next week, and then we can move forward. Okay. Then I think we're at time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I know there was a lot to cover today, and yeah, just yeah, thank you. Thank you for participating, and I'll see you on the next call.
Have a good one, guys.